before Bill starts, otherwise I won't ever get them in.
Who's going to be keeping Bill on track?
Good afternoon. I'm Maureen Willis, Ohio's current Consumers Counsel. It's my great pleasure to moderate this special panel, The Original Story of NASUCA. My own journey with NASUCA began more than 40 years ago as a legal intern for Bill Spratley in 1982. So to be here today with the people who helped build this organization from the ground up feels like coming full circle. NASUCA was born out of a clear and urgent need. In the wake of the energy crisis of the 1970s and rising utility prices, a few determined consumer advocates came together with a common goal: to make sure consumers, real people, had a voice in utility regulation. They understood that no matter how technical the proceedings were or how complicated the filings were, it all comes down to and comes back to how much people are paying and whether they are being treated fairly. And so they built something remarkable, a forum for sharing ideas, strengthening advocacy, and protecting consumers at both the state and the federal level. Today we're going to hear from the leaders, three leaders who helped shape NASUCA's mission and momentum. Bill Spratley in the colorful jacket, can't miss him on the end. He was Ohio's first Consumers Counsel, and he played a key role in the formative years and helped bring NASUCA to life. And then we have Janine Migdon, who served from 2004 to 2011 and helped NASUCA expand its national presence and legal influence. And then, of course, Bruce Weston, Ohio Consumers Counsel from 2012 through 2023, who championed advocacy in both energy and telecom, and even stood before Judge Harold Green in the historic United States versus AT&T case.
On behalf of NASUCA.
On behalf of NASUCA, yes. And I missed the argument. I was in DC and missed the argument.
She was supposed to be there.
He reminds me of that every time we talk about that. They'll take us through the early offices, the first resolutions, landmark litigation, memorable conventions, and maybe a few colorful moments too. And as you listen, I invite you to think about how far we've come and what it means to carry this mission forward. With that, let's begin with the man who helped start it all, Bill Spratley.
I'd just like to say at the beginning that I'm very proud of these three people to my right who stayed in public service. They went in and out of it, but it's remarkable, in my opinion, that they loved their job so much they came back to it and they made it better. So I'm going to try and keep this short, actually.
He says that.
This was about halfway through at least my tenure of almost 17 years, 16 years plus, of being the advocate, the first one in Ohio. It was a full-page story, and it kind of says it depends on who you talk to. I would like to say how we got to this point, and I'd like to give you a little bit of background. First of all, why was Ohio the founding state? Well, I think the real reason is I was 29 when I was appointed, and the legislature gave us a budget of $4 million as a biennial budget. And I worked for a board that still exists. I worked for 21 different board members, a board of 9 that are set by statute. They were appointed by the Attorney General, and he only appoints, I still think, 2 boards. Most of the appointed powers with the governor. And I had been the lobbyist for the Utility Commission. Before that, I had worked for John J. Gilligan, a liberal Democratic governor, who put through the income tax in Ohio, one of the last states, and we knew no governor before him had ever been reelected putting through an income tax. And he lost, and Jimmy Rhodes by less than 1 vote a precinct across 3 million votes in Ohio. And so those of us who were refugees went to various agencies. And the biggest battle leading up to the Consumer Council was in the legislature. If you can imagine, and I don't know if any other states experience this, we went through 50 hearings trying to, and succeeding in, repealing the Reconstruction Costs Due Less Depreciation method of valuing the rate base, which inflated the rate base. Wall Street loved Ohio. The commissioners, to put a brake on that, took 22 months to decide a rate case. And so it took every interest group, you name them, before the utilities finally were persuaded, I don't think the gas companies ever acknowledged it, to go to an original cost basis. 50 hearings on transcripts. We had a transcript of every legislative hearing, and we don't even have legislative history as a legal issue in Ohio like we do at the federal level. The Consumer Council was actually sponsored by a young representative, 25 years old, the youngest person in the legislature, by the name of Sherrod Brown. And he is the father of the Consumers Council. And I say that to him, he's a little bit younger than me. I'm 78 now. And a lot of us would like to see him run again as a governor in this state because he knows it well. But anyway, I just want to give that background of how this happened. It was a massive battle in the legislature. And the utilities fought every inch of the way until they finally had to agree to change this method. And there were lawyers, the way I feel now, that lost a lot of their knowledge of rate making because they were on this old rate base. So that's the first point I wanted to make, and I would like to say, why Ohio? Because we were the biggest state, and also because we started meeting at neighborhood meetings. Faye and I went to the first one in New Orleans, and on a riverboat, we were dancing with commissioners, and then we started counting, and there were 3 commissioners at the time, and there were at least 10 lobbyists for every commissioner. And, you know, we realized how we were, and I felt this in the legislature every time I'd walk in. More than that would be sitting behind me in the hearing room. And it was a lonely thing in a way because, and I'm sure many of you have experienced that, that these are very powerful interests. And I hope that Maureen tells you, and she said a little bit in the meeting, about what happened in Ohio. A $68 million scandal by one of the biggest utilities because of dark money. And that didn't happen to me, but I believe every word of it because I could see how much power. You know, next to making war, the biggest cost in this country is making power and providing gas, all the things that the utilities do. So I'm just going to hold this up. And while I was in the process of leaving, over a period of several months, I wrote a 300-page history of the 140 people, 3 of them sitting here, who took part in the first 16 years of the advocacy of this particular advocate. You know, I lived through 21 different utility commissioners. A lot of them never finished their terms. And we used the media as well as the courts and, of course, the commission and the federal commission to advance every tool. My objective was to use every power at our disposal. And we had cities and villages all across Ohio and Columbia Gas Territory that were under home rule. I myself had been on a charter commission my 3rd year in law school for the city of Worcester, where I grew up, a little town between Akron and Mansfield. So cities could negotiate their own rates. And it took us 14 years of piecing together village by village, city by city, regions, that we finally got a uniform rate for gas, because we had places where somebody paid $10 or $15 more on a bill than their neighboring city or village. I mean, that is how the utilities had reacted. Of course, the big cities had a lot of leverage in that whole thing. So that's a story unto itself. And a lot of this, you know, is something that that is in here, and you can read about it. I'd like to just say that I'll go through these slides.
I said, there you go.
There we go. Okay. They put these slides together, so we'll see what happens here. Congratulations. Is that the last one?
No.
46 years. Well, I'm having trouble remembering. It's a long time ago. Okay. So it was November of '78 that NARUC met in Las Vegas, and we really were fortunate to have commissioners at least would give us a free room at all these NARUC meetings, because they had all, you've been to NARUC meetings, you know how many rooms they'll book in a hotel. And then at that meeting and the one in New Orleans, we realized, I started running into advocates who were there like me, who didn't really know about each other, and we might have called each other, but even then. So we put together a meeting down the street in what we thought was an old banana warehouse, because I tried to set up the image that we were like legal aid lawyers, right on the street level, which always had some problems along with it. But we basically brought them to Columbus. I said earlier that Jack Shreve flew his plane, the former Navy jet pilot, flew his Cessna or prop plane all the way up from Florida. And he was there. He became the second president from Florida. Steve Ham was the third president from South Carolina. And you know, it's kind of like the Presbyterian church that I belong to. If you stay around long enough, you'll be an elder or some, you know, honcho in the church. God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. You know? So this was the meeting that started my first thought. There was Sid Moore, who's not even going to be shown on the map. I don't know when Georgia finally joined NASUCA. But, you know, he sat down, he opened his knapsack, and he pulled out a beer. And we were in kind of a state building, you know, and it was like, you know, now they have beer at the Ohio State game, so it's no big deal, but we were kind of in shock. And the biggest arguments we had, this is going to sound strange, was over the words consumer advocate. I was called the Consumer Counsel. Our office was called the Office of the Consumer's Counsel. And we had public advocates, public counsels, people's counsels. In the legislature, they turned down people's counsel because the legislature thought that sounded like the People's Republic of China. I'm not making this up. And I realized it's still the People's Counsel, the oldest office. So at any rate, we got together, and it was a very heady time. It was the middle of the energy crisis. I got to meet Jimmy Carter, along with a lot of a variety of consumer advocates. I was on the board of the Consumer Federation of America, and I sat in Harold Icah's chair, the Secretary of the Interior. And Jimmy Carter had just come down from the mountaintop when he put the excess profits tax on the oil companies. That's when cars were lined up, rates were going through the roof, and of course, then the deregulation of natural gas started. So we were looking at very high rate cases, very angry consumers that expected us to deliver. One of the first things we did is we spent $200,000 answering the questions, well, how do you know who you represent? So with the cooperation of the utilities, we did a study by income of how consumers use gas and electric. And I don't know whether it makes sense today when you think how electrified everything has become, but that study showed that those folks that are have the lowest incomes use the most gas because they're often in tenant housing where there has not been insulation and there has not been an attempt by a landlord to make the property less susceptible to high rate. On the other hand, on electricity, people who are in the top quartile of income had more electric things. And so it was a very good finding because we wanted the utilities to know that we were going to represent the consumers based on data. And that was something that happened throughout and is detailed in here. And I'll just try to round up here or update all my notes scribbled like I see Bruce has done too. There's so many memories. The year before they were in New Orleans, the utility commissioners met in Hawaii. And Jack Shreve used to say, we need to meet in the Virgin Islands. And I think I saw Jamaica as a member of NASUCA now, so this is a coat I wore on the Caribbean cruise. So, and Faye and I have also been completely around South America. But I think that the importance of NASUCA is that it brought advocates together. We shared our stories. And the advocate from Florida said what I heard Jack Shreve say every time: we need to be sharing briefs. We need to be helping each other. And finally, we began to help each other at the federal level. Under Jimmy Carter, there was an attempt to set up a federal consumer agency. And if you go back and read the politics of it, it died because of Ralph Nader. I think he didn't think it was good enough. But there might have been. That was how much consumers were affecting legislators in the Congress and in the state legislatures. So let me just wrap up by saying that I listened to the advocates talk about things that we never dreamed of. We didn't have computers till far into the term I had. We had paper files. We didn't have emails. We didn't have, Maureen tells me she got 1 million documents. And I'm visualizing that because we would put things in a physical filing cabinet. I mean, the docketing was a rotating file and all this. So we're kind of the pioneers, but I think that all of you now are still here. And it's so exciting to see so many more people that are committed to this. And I realize the pressure that you're under in each state. We certainly were under pressure, and in a lot of ways we had to fight for our existence every day. And it makes it very important, I think, to the consumers you represent to know they have an advocate that will fight for them. I'm going to stop while I'm at that.
So what's interesting was back in the day when Bill Spratley was the Consumers Counsel, there was a time when Bruce, Maureen, and I were in what was called the bullpen. We were legal interns, and we all shared an office with a few others. And whoever, when I became the Consumers Counsel, I thought, whoever thought I'd come back to run the joint after having been the legal intern there. But, and then Bruce and Maureen followed. So, I'm going in the wrong direction, aren't I? Okay, so. And when NASUCA was formed, at that time I was in law school, but I was also serving as Bill's administrative assistant. So while Bill was the visionary, coming up with all of these fabulous ideas and working with the consumers advocates, I was doing all the grunt work in the background as the administrative assistant. And back at that time, it was when the meetings would be held, a lot of the times it was talking about, the advocates would just get together. It was a small group of advocates. There wasn't a whole, as many people as there are in the room today, and mostly heads of state. And we would spend a lot of time, and there weren't utilities and other industry groups interested because they didn't even really understand or know that NASUCA existed. And a lot of the time was shared talking about, our war stories. Everybody had war stories. We went state by state and we told our war stories and we exchanged information. And it was a very good way to hear what was going on, like especially where you had utilities that were multi-state utilities. You find out that AEP was doing something in Kentucky. Well, you knew it was coming to Ohio because if they succeeded, and vice versa. So there was some very good sharing of information that was so critical and so important. And the advocates knew this and understood this and realized this, and that it was important to come together for those kind of reasons so that we could share information, share expertise, like who was your witness who testified on this specific issue? Can we get them too? And how to, what cases did you win? What cases went up to the Supreme Court? Sonny Podkowski very famously took a case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was a fabulous outcome. So that was one of the very important things about NASUCA. But another very important thing was when the telephone industry deregulated, a lot of the work that had always traditionally been on the state level with state-by-state rate cases came under the jurisdiction of the FCC, and so it changed the whole picture of how things were handled. And when I became the Consumers Counsel, the late and great Dave Bergman was doing a lot of work on telecommunications. And OCC, fortunately, in Ohio, had fortunately one of the largest budgets. And so I was able to say, okay, Dave, you can spend 90% of your time on federal issues doing FCC work, because that impacts all the ratepayers in Ohio in terms of those outcomes. And it also impacted the ratepayers across the country. And so a team was put together, and there were a number of people. Turn had some people that were worked on the telecom, Regina, and others. You worked on it, others worked on it. So it was a really good outcome where we'd share briefs, share the work, and sign off as an organization. And that was really a critical way to harness resources, because if you look around all these state advocates, as Bill pointed out, OCC had one of the largest budgets. A lot of agencies had much smaller budgets and couldn't spare the resources. So because we were lucky to have that kind of a budget, we were able to do that at that time. And then later, as deregulation occurred after telecommunications, it occurred in the electric industry as well, and later in the gas industry. And we started to see the emergence of regional transmission organizations. So then it was very important for the members of NASUCA and the various regional transmission organizations to come together and work on issues collectively, because a lot of that work was in FERC. It's very hard on a state consumer advocate budget to travel from Maine down to Washington, or from Wyoming to Washington, well, Wyoming's not one of them, but California to Washington, or wherever. It was much better if we could come together as a group and have groups and work together in order to pool resources, because of the cost of litigating everything in Washington, D.C. So that was really another tremendous benefit of NASUCA as a group. So there were a number of things that we did together. And then the other thing that we were able to do as part of FERC was tackle the governance issues within our RTOs. John Willinghoff was the chair of FERC, and he opened up a docket on governance issues. And so NASUCA went together, we did a paper on governance, brought up all the issues of the inadequate representation of consumer advocates before FERC and the power of the utility companies. And that was, and there were hearings on it. We went and we testified, and we were able to have an impact. So the value of NASUCA has been recognized throughout its history as being something where we're united, we can come together, pool resources, pool our brain power, and come up with good outcomes. And I'm going to, oops, wrong way. Oh, I see why, because I'm holding it upside down. It's totally wrong. So, and together as NASUCA, one of the powers of NASUCA is our ability to pass resolutions, and there are some sample resolutions here that we passed. But to make a statement that then is given to the industry, to the commissioners, that says, we, all of us advocates across the country, we think this is the right direction to go. We think that this is what we ought to do. And there's a certain amount of power in that that is very helpful in trying to move policy and move NARUC and move others. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. So.
Hello, NASUCA. It's really great to see you. I went to law school to work in the public interest, but I didn't know I was going to work in it, and that's, serendipity. And so I looked in the white pages, I looked in the phone book, the paper phone book, and I found the name of the Consumers Council, and I thought, oh, those are for names of it. That sounds good, public interest. So next thing, I had an interview with Bill Spradley. Think about, early NASUCA, early consumer advocacy. Bill wanted a storefront law office for the agency. That's how he thought of it. He wanted people, like consumers, to be able to walk in off the street and talk to us. Also, he didn't believe in spending much money, government's money, public's money. So he generally looked for the crappiest office space he could find. So,
which he succeeded in.
Yeah. So, and he also thought it was something important about independence, protect the independence of be in one's own building. So my interview with Bill was in what we call the Blue Building. And where's the clicker, by the way?
It's over there.
Oh, it's up here. I'm just going to test it. Which way is going forward?
That would be going forward.
Okay. In any event, so I had an interview with the head of this agency. His desk was covered with plastic, and there was water on it. The building leaked, which was, perfect for Bill's aesthetic, right? So Bill just matter of factly said, well, the roof leaks. So the Consumers Council desk covered with plastic. Anyway, that was my interview, and I was very fortunate to be hired and to learn from one of the most courageous people, maybe the most, people in public service that I've ever known. And NASUCA, NASUCA is populated with those people. But in any event, that's my own origin story. We're all part of a consumer movement. In the 70s when NASUCA was formed. And so I was illegal, that was 1978, so I was 1978. We're all part of a consumer movement. And, the movement, the re-establishment of the movement or the momentum of the 60s and 70s was, closer to the time. And so, I read that in 1962 is when President Kennedy included in an address to Congress that there should be consumer protections, which was, not so typical. And the movement goes way back even before then, but the right to safety, right to be informed, right to choose, and right to be heard. And some of these, like the right to be heard, to choose, to be informed, those are basic tenets. And ultimately, those things that President Kennedy talked about became known as the Consumer Bill of Rights. And NASUCA, 20 years later, has a resolution on Bill of Rights. Bill Spradley had a resolution, had a Bill of Rights, what was it, early 80s maybe? Bill of Rights. But anyway, that was a real, NASUCA thing, but it was all, part of this movement. So in any event, I was only a legal intern, not to diminish internships, but so I'm able to share with you based on, what I can remember from the midst of time and also my status at that time. But I did regularly go to NASUCA meetings and I met people. But one thing I want to say is, in the beginning, and I think this has already been suggested, but we weren't popular, in some quarters unpopular, which tells you in a way we're doing our jobs, right? If they don't introduce legislation to basically take over your office or eliminate your office or your position, I mean, are you doing your job, okay? And a number, over the years, people have had that experience. Myself had a little bit of that experience from across the street. But in any event, it tells you something about doing your job, about having courage, which is what all three of my colleagues here have had lots of. In any event, we were so popular, and so it really meant a lot to us when people would help us become who we wanted to be, in NASUCA. So, like one thing I'm up in is Harry Trebbing, Dr. Harry Trebbing. So Harry Trebbing ran this thing, the education NARUC, he's passed some years ago, but he was in charge of education at Michigan State, and he didn't allow the industry in, which I think NASUCans at that time thought was, it's about for regulars. But, just because some of us were regulars didn't necessarily mean we were included. But Harry Trebbing included us. He allowed us, to attend. And that's, I got the words here, the NASUCA resolution gave NASUCA freely of his time, supported consumer outlets as important players in the regulatory process. So that was his thing, because that was not universal by any means, nothing close. But Henry Trebbing was that. So I do remember many years ago, in the 80s. Am I okay?
Yeah, well, something pulled up on the screen, so keep talking. I'm going to fix the computer screen.
Okay. So, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So, I remember Henry standing on stage at Michigan State in the summer, and he raised his voice, and he was talking to regulators and consumer advocates in the 80s about their relationship with the industry. He raised his voice, I think he extended his hands, as I recall, and he said, "They are not your friends." He's talking about the industry. Okay? He's basically giving an ethics lesson. Oh, by the way, there's Faye Bradley, who did parliamentarian duties for NASUCA dealers, isn't that right? So Faye would attend NASUCA meetings, and thank you, Faye. Some recognition for Faye. Anyways, Harry Trebbing was so great to NASUCA, really meant a lot. It's part of our origin. And then Dr. Douglas Jones, he worked for the National Regulatory Research Institute, which was NABUR's research arm. And NASUCA later had a resolution to create like a NASUCA research arm, which was needed. But nonetheless, he was very free with sharing NRA's research. It didn't cost that much, but it cost. I think he would let consumer advocates sometimes have them for free. And so we would learn from his stuff. He shared his stuff. He wanted people in his class. Now, you couldn't from advocacy. So, obviously people were going to travel to Ohio. But a number of us, including myself, he was mentors to us. We attended his class on utility regulation at Ohio State. Jenny Morelli. So, the thing that was sort of like a joke about Jenny Morelli in the very early years of NASUCA was like, people would say, she's the only one who will talk to us. So like when NASUCA, and it's an exaggeration, we were blessed that any number of people talk to us, but truly, not a lot, And anyway, we would meet, and Jenny, who was like a deputy counsel at NARUC, Jenny would come to us, and she would talk like totally frankly and share stuff with us. And so wherever Jenny is, thanks to Jenny for helping NASUCA become, NASUCA, because information is power too, And she told us a lot of stuff about when we would meet about what was going on. David knows, I think I've shared with David, those early meetings, and was mentioned how, Janine mentioned how we would sit around and talk. I love that. I learned how to be a consumer advocate partly from, the original NASUCA. You come here and it's just like, oh wow, that's going on. And, then, so the utilities, some of them, they would operate in multiple states, or they would all talk anyways. So they would be working against consumers, so to speak, or working in their interests, And then NASUCA was sort of like our way of like sharing and kind of like countering that and building. So yeah, we had the consultant swap meet, and so anyway, I was one, it's so respectful, but I was one who preferred like the original NASUCA. All due respect, David, I understand that times, bigger organization, but I preferred it, and it's, when it was kind of changing, I was like, oh no, preserve this thing where we sit around in a room and talk and learn and hear stories of courage and feel better about what we're doing, and so forth. So that's that take. So David in his introduction that was, I guess, part of what Maureen was going to say. In his great introduction, David, I appreciate that, David, like when he came to Columbus, it just so happened that David and Chris Ayers and Bill Fine, they were in Columbus, and David was like, hey, let's have dinner, so we had dinner downtown. And then David in particular was up for going, like walking 3 blocks over, late at night in Columbus. Fortunately the authorities weren't called or something. What are these guys doing in front of a building? But that building, which I think says 1918 at the top, that was where NASUCA leaders of what was to become NASUCA, the origins, that's where it happened, through those doors. But not through that door, because the building became owned later by a very prominent lobbying firm, and it didn't look anything like what Spratley rented. So when they walked through, wasn't that. In fact, Bill, isn't that what you said when you rented a place that was a former banana warehouse? Is that what it was?
Storefront, yes.
No, but was it a former banana warehouse?
I always heard it was.
Okay, we don't know. It was infested. It was infested with wiffle boars, whatever. But nonetheless, maybe that came from bananas. Maybe it didn't. Nonetheless, this is your history, NASUCA. Okay, those are your roots. Okay, not a lot of money and gilded offices and fancy desks and all that stuff. So anyway, that's where the magic is. So it was like 40 years later, as it turned out. So we went back, and David took a photo of us standing in front of 137 East State Street. So there you have it. What's in a name? So I think I'm sorry, I'm over time.
We're gonna obviously run a couple minutes long, but
May I have 2
the
minutes?
reception's not till 6. We got time.
May I have 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So, I want to say something. So we don't remember who all the originals are, and also I highly recommend that you have a project where David or Nicole or somebody sends an email to NASUCA, or one of you sends an email, and asks for the offices who know or are aware, know that they were one of the original members. To write, share, and then we'll come up with it. Because David writes us and says we need to know who the original 16 are. And I thought, we'll find that. No, we couldn't find it. None of us could find it. We did nothing. David couldn't find it. So it's like in my retirement, I go see 60s rock concerts, right? And it's it's a diminishing thing because we're losing them. But it's before there's just no way to reconstruct this.
Yeah, wasn't there a slide earlier that we missed that had the states?
Well, we have identified the states, but not the individual consumer advocates. I think we've got the states.
So
Put that slide up.
Yes,
Okay.
Bruce, can you turn the slide?
Here, you turn to it.
Okay.
So while we're waiting for that, I just want to give a shout out to here's some people I can remember. Some of them I think were not even necessarily consumer members yet, but visited with us. But Kathleen O'Reilly from Wisconsin, who is a dynamic consumer public interest person. Sylvia Siegel from Turn, dynamic person. These bigger than life personalities really kind of helped back in the day. Okay. All right. So Gene Kimmelman and Consumer Federation and others there.
Can't read your notes.
Yeah, I can't read my scribbles, but I was trying to remember last night. Alan Barrett, Michigan, interesting guy, strong consumer advocate, goes way back. Years later, went to work, I think, in some Pacific Islands. So again, I'll stop there. But there were just so many people involved in making NASUCA what it was and doing that, at an early time. So, now this slide. No, not that slide. Brain, how do you get back to mine?
This is why we had to sit in a room, because nobody could work technology until you did this.
That's where we're
You get there.
Oops.
Give me one more. One more.
You want one more?
Yeah, one more. Okay. So I think mainly I was invited because David Springy likes a story about how, as a legal intern, like in '78 or something, I was assigned a research project for NASUCA. So, I mean, I'm joking, David, but, So yes, I was. And Dick had Bill had a legal director, Dick Goodman, at that time, was also involved in NASUCA. But anyway, Dick probably knew his office. There were no emails or anything, but it said, like, I have an assignment for you for research. Go over to the Supreme Court Law Library and check out this name, because we're forming an association. And he's like, and I think he was like, you can't show this name to anyone or whatever. But he's like, here's the name. We got to know that there's not another, sort of prominent organization with this name, or that the acronym's good. And, of course, it's not my place to make the comment that was already on my mind, but I wanted to say, your name has 7 words. There's not going to be another organization with 7 words. But I didn't say that because it wasn't the place of a legal intern to say that. But I did then validate my original hypothesis, by going over to the Supreme Court and without telling them the name, having them assist with how to research this. And there's a lot of names, and I think some even kind of came close, but whatever. But and I think, for the midst of time, I can't remember, they might have given me one more name. But anyway, that was the research came back you're solid. The National Association of State Consumer Advocates, Okay, that's going to work. Then the other thing, and this is on NASUCA's website, but this thing about, NASUCA being the essential voice. So that was something that, in the early days that we're wrestled with. David's telling me now that, actually, there's so many now offers, people are needed to, fill some of the offers. But back in the early day, there was still this, paradigm where it's if you have the regulator and you have the utility, you have the universe. Whereas we've got the regulator is supposed to be in the middle, and then we're on one side, and utilities are on the other side. So it was really this effort to get a space, to get a seat at the table, anywhere. And so I was involved with the telecom committee, and I think that people involved Ron Binns, Dan Clearfield, Charlie Beck, who worked with Shreve, in Colorado, Clearfield, Pennsylvania. But anyway, not all these people somehow. So the divestiture was obviously a huge thing, and NASUCA was not so involved in it. But there was going to be a 3-year review of certain parts of it. The line of business restrictions. So NASUCA was given the opportunity to speak on the line of business restrictions, which was quite a stage for NASUCA to speak, because you were listed as on behalf of the nation's consumers. So I think I got to say, I did it, which was I think a combination of everyone in the committee taking a step back, and I was just still standing there, and also I was interested in doing it. But in any event, I was in front of Judge Harold Green for NASUCA on behalf of the nation's consumers, and we gave the NASUCA version of what was important for consumers with respect to long-distance telephone service, which, is not really a thing anymore. But nonetheless, those on the committee who had the connections with other consumers or whatever, because it was kind of negotiated between 3 consumer groups, because there were going to be 24 speakers over 3 days, 3 are going to be consumers. And so they made it happen that we would get this place in this case, so TV coverage of all this stuff. But that was part of becoming the essential voice, which was such a challenge back then. One thing I just want to bring your attention in this next slide is, so the resolutions are pretty nicely presented on NASUCA's website. This is just some of the early resolutions, honorary resolutions. It's actually about 2.5 pages. But, it might make a nice plaque on your office wall or something if you, see one of your predecessors there. So, it's on the website, NASUCA website, and you can, add some history to your office or whatever. So, good thing to have that. So, I guess that's where I'll that's where I'll leave it. Thank you so much for letting me share with you.
Thank you, Bruce. One of my 3 favorite bosses. So, Bill, Janine, Bruce, thank you for sharing the history of NASUCA, but also the spirit behind it. We see that through their eyes, the stories, the passions, and even some great behind-the-scene details that remind us that NASUCA has always been about more than just dockets and filings. It's about people and purpose. We've heard how NASUCA grew out of a time of crisis, but also out of collaboration. From the earliest meetings to courtrooms and commissions across the country, the organization has stood as a voice for consumers and a home base for those who speak on their behalf. And through it all, one thing has remained constant. NASUCA's meetings have never been short. But maybe that's part of the magic, because what started as a handful of people trying to get a seat at the table has grown into a respected national force, one that brings expertise, credibility, and yes, a little spirited debate whenever utility policy is being made. So let's take inspiration from this story. Let's keep showing up, asking tough questions, challenging assumptions, and always keeping consumers at the center of the conversation. Thank you for being part of NASUCA's legacy and its future.
I hope you enjoyed that. So I have to say, I have been floating around NASUCA for 27-ish years, and it has been a great honor for me to work with. I didn't get to work with Bill, but I got to work with these 3, and to know the history and to follow Ohio. And that was super fun for me to put this together and be able to invite them in. There are lots of stories. All of the resolutions that NASUCA has ever passed are on the website. So we have a resolutions page, and you can kind of go over, and there's, different committees, but down at the bottom, there's like the pre-1998.
It says 96, but I think it's
96, yeah. So you can go back to the original resolutions, they are all still there. We have that history. And I want that book, Bill. I want a copy of that book. So we don't have that on the website yet. So thank you all. I hope you guys are coming to the reception tonight so we can continue the conversation. I didn't hear you say it, but Bruce brought chocolates. Bruce always brings Ohio State House chocolates. So there's Ohio State House chocolates out there in a basket. Please grab one. They're super fun. I was rummaging around last time I was here, I got an Ohio lapel pin.
Yes.
And I was rummaging around trying to find it. I couldn't find it in my bag. I'm sure it's at home. No. I have one, Bruce. I have one.
Okay.
I have one.
Okay.
I just don't have it in my bag.
Okay.
But yeah, Bruce, it was fun to come to town and have Bruce tour you around, and I got lapel pins and chocolates and all sorts of stuff. Great fun. And I did want to, again, Faye, Bill's wife Faye, is as much a part of NASUCA history as everyone else. She's been to more NASUCA meetings than I, most of us. She really did take the notes. She took the pictures. She helped organize. She is as much a part of our history. So, good to have her. All right, so reception tonight. Again, check the agenda. It's at the Key, K-E-E, 6 or 7 blocks. I don't know how we're getting there if it's raining, but, you're creative. You're adults. Find a way. I was hoping to walk, but I guess we'll Uber. And we have, it's not, usually we have like a 2-hour reception and then get the hell out kind of thing, but we get to actually hang around, so we can be there for maybe 3 hours or so and then relax and really get to
Till
it.
the booze runs out.
Till I cut the booze off. So, I don't want it to run out. I know this group. That's just trouble. And then we're back here early tomorrow.